Hi, good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. And give everybody a minute to get settled in here as attendees of our webinar. And we will get started with an announcement from Steph shortly.
Good afternoon, everyone. We will get started probably at like 2:02.
Sounds good. That's just enough time for us to look at each other awkwardly.
This feel like the longest minute.
Yeah, Greg Brooks is over there telling me I look smarter with glasses. I've officially reached the old age category because I've added glasses to my repertoire because of my poor old eyes. My son, funny story on that. My son, when I got them, said, "Wow, Dad, you're a real nerd." And I said, "Well, son, I've been a real nerd for a long time. You just didn't know it."
Yeah, I'm thinking about getting glasses too. I don't really, I've never even enjoyed like a sunglass
Right,
before.
right,
I don't like
right.
have things on my face, but
Yep. It's an adjustment. I'm especially old because I even had to get the ones where I have to look up to get it to be real clear. So I'm getting used to moving my head instead of my eyeballs.
yeah.
It's great webinar fodder here, but probably ought to get going now.
Yeah, yeah, I see everyone. Okay, so all right. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Stephanie, the Director of Marketing at Data Mark Technologies. I'm going to hop off here in just a second and let Jeff and John do their thing, but I just wanted to let everybody know that National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week is coming up the second week of April. And every year for National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week, we do something, we offer 24 hours of catering and we fly out and give an award to the Peace App of the Year. So if you know of a Peace App that you want to nominate, we would love to see your nominations come through. So I'm going to drop the link in the chat. But just wanted to remind everybody of that. And I'll also send a link in the follow-up email to this webinar. But that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. Yeah, we really enjoy recognizing PSAPs and for the good work that they do. And National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week around here is in fact a holiday week, so we get to go out and see our clients and say thank you for all that hard work that they do. So we'd love to recognize you if you'll nominate your PSAP as well. Thanks everybody for joining us today for an AI crash course. This is going to be pretty much the basics on AI. I am by no means an expert in that topic, but I've come to learn a lot recently as we sort of dive into the topic here within the Datamark Technologies organization, and we, start to use it for our own purposes, as well as think about how it fits into our products and services and enhances the offerings that we have to our clients. And it should be a fun ride today, and I really appreciate John you for joining us today. Um, John is the PSAP director at Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and I'll go ahead and let you give yourself an introduction there, John.
Yeah, good afternoon. John Guy, Bucks County 911 in Pennsylvania. So we are northwest, we're the northwest border of Philadelphia. So we're in that southeast corner of Pennsylvania. And I've been here since 2020, and I spent 20 years in the county just south of us, Montgomery County, before I came here, and also 5 years as a consultant in public safety. So I myself, Jeff, just like you, I'm not the AI expert, but just enough to be dangerous in the 911 realm. And I'm excited to talk to the GIS folks because um, the the marriage between 911 and GIS has never been more crucial, and developing AI processes, not just for 911, but on the GIS side of things, highly vital. So excited to have the conversation.
Yeah, good. I really appreciate you joining us. As we've prepared for this, I've gotten to know your familiarity with the topic, and if you're not an expert, you're certainly a good at good at figuring out what goes where and how things could look in the future. So I'm excited to have you share some of your insights with the audience here. Um, I am going to turn my camera off to preserve my bandwidth, just in case that's an issue, and we may come back on later. But we'll jump right into the topic here. And as always, we want to invite everybody to keep that chat hopping for us as you have questions, as you have comments, if you want to talk about your own experience with AI or whatever the topic is that strikes your fancy. Go ahead and fire that up in the chat. Stephanie will be monitoring that for us. And at some point, if we have any questions to answer or insights to give based on the chat, we'll be happy to jump on that. So what are we going to talk about today? I want to talk about really like not just what is AI, but it feels like there's a lot of big feels about AI these days, right? And it feels bigger than it is. So I want to talk about that for just a second. Then we'll jump into what are the basics, right? What is an LLM? What is NLP? How does prompting play a role? The scary idea of agentic AI, especially when John, he's going to talk about the elephants in the room for us, um, and join in on that. And then we'll just sort of wrap it up with, what does it look like moving forward? What are the things we need to think about? What are the things you're already doing? Be a great opportunity for you guys to give us any feedback in the chat, and we can start open up that conversation with everybody. So why AI feels bigger than it is? I remember a couple of years ago, it really hit the scene. What about 2022? AI was actually something, was a thing to start using and start exploring. All of a sudden, it's more than Skynet of RoboCop. It's more where we had to start reconciling sort of the scariness of sci-fi with the reality of what is artificial intelligence. I'll be honest with you, and I'll talk about this on the next slide as well as we talk about the difference between automation, ML, and AI. My initial reaction was, look, we've been doing that for years here over in the GIS profession, right? Automating data uh, preparation, extraction, translation, loading, machine learning scripts of data, all those types of things. We've been doing that for a long time, but AI is something different. So we'll talk about that. And public safety professionals are generally a skeptical bunch. And I don't know, John, if you have anything to say about that, but especially as it comes to sort of new technologies, it's got to be proven, it's got to be reliable, and they're rightly cautious. Can you have any thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, and we'll get more into this with the pilot that we're doing. But if you want something broken or try to break it as best you can, give it to a
Right.
dispatcher because they will try and have done very well to
Yep.
battle test some of the things we're doing.
Yeah, and there's an increased sense of kind of like importance with the work that they do. It is life critical. It is life saving, and it's important to be a little bit skeptical and measured about our approach and jump into new technologies. What we need, though, is about clarity and not hype. And that's what we're looking to do today. Really just set the foundation of what are the terms. Like I said, what is an LLM? What is NLP? Well, how does prompting play a role? And really today we want to talk about those things as a foundation. And what my hope is that we're setting a foundation for this webinar audience that we can build on in future webinars where we discuss some more details about how some of those things impact GIS, how they impact 911, and specific opportunities as they come up down the road to talk about what AI can do for us. I think it's most important to think about this last bullet as well. It's most valuable when paired with domain expertise. Some of those elephants in the room that we're going to talk about later in the webinar are really going to dive into this topic. But AI is no good without, natural intelligence, I'll call it. I don't know what the actual opposite term for artificial intelligence is, but I'll call it natural intelligence today. So let's talk a little bit about what is the difference, right? Clear up the language. Asking, understanding the difference helps us ask better questions, and so it's important that we do. Automation is rule based, right? There's no learning or judgment involved with it. Some examples are in our realm is about CAD routing rules. You put in a turn restriction, the CAD engine says I will not recommend a turn. Where there is a turn restriction, it therefore does that. Sometimes, though, the people that drive the fire trucks that are taking those routing recommendations, they're out in the field, they see the situation, and they go, you know what, that is a turn restriction because there's a boulevard, say, down the road, but I also see that it's a low profile one that was built for me to drive this fire truck over, so I'm going to drive it over it, regardless of what the recommendation is. That is, again, that natural intelligence, assessing the scene, what's the situation. I think I've heard lots of different disciplines use the phraseology, something along the lines of assess, adapt, and overcome, right? That is the intelligence of humans that allows that to happen. Automation doesn't have any of that. It doesn't even have the artificial intelligence that we'll talk about in just a minute, and that's what makes it distinct. Machine learning is about learning patterns from data, and it improves with examples. The key point here is that it recognizes patterns and it doesn't understand context. So AI, artificial intelligence, adds to all of that, right? It adds the ability to reason and think in a certain way, again, as it's programmed. So it only thinks the way it's programmed to think, but it is able to actually think and learn and be trained. And so it is sort of a natural extension of automation or machine learning. When you pair it with things like natural language processing that we'll talk about next, or here in just a second, and reasoning systems. So let's start with the large language models. That's when you say AI these days and you talk about models, um, I think first and foremost about large language models because those are the ones that are most impactful in our lives. The things that bring the most benefits, sort of the most immediately, are these large language models. And that's really what hit the scene back in that 2022, 2023 timeframe. A large language model is a system trained on massive amounts of data, right? Text to generate and analyze language. For me, GIS is about spatial, right? So there's not a whole lot. There is definitely interactions for LLMs in GIS. But what has to evolve from what we think of as AI today is a sort of spatial AI as well. Lots of vendors out there, lots of companies out there are working hard at, advancing the idea of a geo AI. And I hope I didn't use somebody's brand name there. Again, not an expert on that, but I don't think I did. But LLMs are good at summarizing and drafting and explaining and translating, and they're good at understanding some of the nuances of language for the languages with which it's been trained to understand. And some of the example, I saw a graphic recently somewhere in the interwebs that sort of explained that if you tend to be living in a Western civilization, um, European or North American, that the LLMs that are out there are going to be pretty concentric to your life, your use of language, your intents and explanations that you use day in and day out. But as you get into more of the developing world, the what we used to call it, the third world, or even further away from Europe in the developed world, like advanced civilizations in Asia and things like that, these LLMs are less good at understanding your intents and the way that you use language because they just haven't been fully trained on those dialects and languages just yet. So LLMs are pretty amazing. I think we'll all admit we've dabbled, if we've tried and dabbled with things like uh, OpenAI's ChatGPT or Claude, Copilot, Microsoft Copilot here at Michael Baker International and Datamark. We are limited to using Copilot for professional endeavors. Um, but if you've used those and experimented with them, you've seen the ways that they can really reduce the friction. And we'll talk about that in specific here in just a minute, but reduce the friction of things like summarizing and drafting and explaining. They're really good at that. What they're not so great at is guaranteed accuracy because they certainly can have biases. They certainly can have hallucinations. They certainly can have things that are introduced by the data upon which they're trained that don't reflect your reality. What they also lack or are not good at is local policy awareness. They're big models. They're sort of chewing up, gobbling up all the sort of language-based information that they can out there in the world. And so they don't understand local nuances, local policy. And that's especially critical in the place that 911 folks should be a little bit concerned and watch as they deploy these things that they don't give it too much authority or weight, so that that problem doesn't become a big problem. It also doesn't necessarily have, these large language models don't necessarily have independent decision-making abilities. As we sort of evolve in the world, LLMs, in my mind, form a basis for AI. As we get into things like agentic AI and you're creating agents based off of these large language models that start to do things for you, that's where this independent decision-making capabilities or lack thereof become very impactful. NLP is the next thing, natural language processing, turning unstructured text into usable insights. NLP is the sort of thinking that AI does, and it's the way that it learns to think the way that we tend to think or express language because it's trained on the LLM. Again, what that LLM is trained on is critical, but it's the way that we naturally process language in our own day-to-day use of language that NLP enables in AI. It enables you instead of having to remember all those command line prompts, in a many years past, I used AutoCAD, and I was really good at command line AutoCAD. I did a lot of that with ArcInfo in the days when I used ArcInfo. I'm really showing my dinosaur age there for you GIS folks by bringing up ArcInfo. But we're really good at command lines. And I imagine, John, you and the PSAP and lots of your folks probably are really good at entering command lines in CAD, for instance, as they create incidents. They've trained themselves and sort of developed these neural channels that every time they want to open an incident, they know the command to type to do that. And for some of of them, kind of like us in GIS, the older the older this is probably more prevalent for. If you were trained that way, it's going to be easier for you to immediately type something in than it is for you to grab a mouse and maybe use a input device to go up and click things.
Yep.
I think of NLP as the same way. It translates that command line language that gets typed in to the input device, moving the mouse and clicking on different menus to do different things or different choices to do different things. Um, why does this matter in public safety? Most critical information lives in narratives, notes, and reports. And John, you could probably speak to this, but there's probably a lot of details in there that may or may not ever see the light of day, but NLP may help it sort of be extracted and explained and aggregated and sort of turned into some useful products. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
No, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of detail that live outside of those fields that get entered and easily read uh, and vetted, but it's not in a uniform or standard language often. So yeah, it would take some time to learn all of the iterations of different people.
Yeah, as we talked about this as we were preparing for it, I said, you're probably literally so busy answering a phone that you don't have time to even think about what was entered into that last record, right? In your
Right.
RMS or your CAD record. NLP is what helps surface those patterns that you don't have time to go in and get.
Mhm.
We talked as well about a couple of different products out there that we won't speak to specifically, but that do blew my mind a little bit when I saw a demo recently of a product that does, dispatcher QA/QI, quality assurance. I don't remember what QI means, but I know they always say QA and then QI.
Improvement, quality
There you go,
improvement.
improvement. Thank you. But it did a really fascinating job of exactly this. It surfaced the patterns in that particular call that they were demoing, where somebody forgot to ask it, for instance, the vehicle color. And they needed some specific training on, you keep forgetting to ask for the vehicle color. So in this training scenario, we're going to focus on getting you to remember to ask the vehicle color. Something that undoubtedly many people have sat in PSAPs and done that is as their job as the QA supervisor or whatever, but they had to do a lot of work to get that one lesson found where this particular piece of software was showing how it found lots of opportunities for improvement and then created a kind of custom training program about it. And I know you'll talk more about that later. But
Mhm.
that's one of the fascinating thoughts and uses of it for me as I see it in public safety today. But some good examples, right? Like categorizing incident reports, searching years of documentation with plain language, finding those patterns and identifying data quality issues. That certainly applies to what we spoke about in the QA/QI of a dispatcher, but definitely for GIS nerds out there as well. We're always looking for patterns. We're trained pattern recognition specialists, and that's what this LLM paired with a natural language processing model or method combined to do. So that leads very naturally, since we're talking about natural language processing, to prompting. What you ask for from the AI is generally what you get. And every time I get frustrated at a query with Copilot, I have to sort of turn the finger back on myself and go, well, I didn't ask a very good question there for what I really wanted. I couldn't actually sort of put it into language myself, so I had to think about it and iterate across it. And I think that's the most important thing about prompting. Not that there's probably ever actually a perfect prompt, but there is an iterative process that has to occur. We talk about that all the time here at Datamark as it relates to GIS data preparation or NextGen 901 for inclusion in CAD, for any other purpose for public safety. Iteration on the creation and improvement of GIS data is natural to us, and iteration and improvement of your prompts will come along with it. Prompting really is about providing context and defining what you're looking for while setting the constraints and specifying the outputs. Nice and simple. until you go ask it a question and it gives you the answer that you asked it for, but that's not the answer that you wanted. It's the question and how you ask the question that's important. Here's a crispy is one particular methodology that I've started to use and embrace as it relates to creating prompts. It talks first about context, right? It includes what is the situation that you want the AI to sort of position itself into as it thinks about things, the situation and environment, the purpose of the work, or the audience. For instance, you may start your prompt out with this analysis supports NG911 readiness planning for a county GIS program. You may start it out with something like, you are a GIS analyst in a 911 center. That way it begins to have some context to the question you're about to follow it up with. You want to be sure and specify the role. And as a GIS analyst in a 911 center, you are you are at an expert level or you're at an entry level. Maybe you're actually that GIS, that dispatch supervisor who was really good at spreadsheets, and somebody said, "Hey, you should do GIS for the comm center here." And so you may tell it, "Hey, I'm a GIS analyst at a 911 center, but I have a novice level of expertise around GIS." Then you should give it some instructions. This is the core task, stated clearly and actionably. Something along the lines of analyze the current address data set and identify risks related to dispatchable location accuracy. So you tell it what you want with that instruction step. Fourthly, how should the AI think through the problem, right? What are the steps you want it to take? First, analyze incident points so that you can get the pattern of incident types or the medical dispatch type and that landed in the CAD system, for instance. You may tell it something along the lines of identify common address completeness issues. Go find me all the overlapping road ranges. Wouldn't that be fun if you had a query you could put in, hey, go find me all the overlapping road ranges and show me in ArcGIS Pro. I don't know a way to do that right now, but maybe someday something like that will come up. But you can include that part in the steps of the crispy framework. Next there, what are the constraints or boundaries? What are the parameters you want to apply to that? Something like use neutral non-marketing language. I do that a lot in my prompts because sometimes, especially from my experience in the Copilot environment, it has access to Michael Baker's data. So it can go through all of the great marketing products that Stephanie and her team have produced and the corporate marketing products and things like that. But sometimes I don't want the sort of marketing version of things. I want the actual maybe project description, maybe the project notes that were taken or meeting notes or whatever it is. And I'll have to instruct it use neutral non-marketing language, for instance. Say also things like no assumptions beyond the provided data. We're going to talk about hallucinations here in just a second. You're basically saying don't hallucinate anything. Tell me what's actually true based on the data that you have. And finally, the examples part of the crispy framework. What does good look like, right? Reduce formatting drift, improve consistency, align tone and structure. We do that a lot where we may take on some projects that are bigger than one person can do, like for instance, writing a use case scenario. We may have a client success person write up something, a project management person write up something, a GIS analyst write up something because they have their own parts of the machine that moved forward on a particular project that we're trying to document. But we want to run it through a filter at the end that says, align tone and structure so that it gives it one voice instead of multiple voices in whatever we're outputting. So that's the crispy framework. Certainly there's a lot of others out there. Again, not an expert in it, but it's one that I've adopted recently and I've tried to begin using. And I'll just put this out there as an example of something that's worked out pretty well for me as I iterated through a prompt and I adopted that crispy framework. Here's one that I use on a regular basis. As a client success manager here at Datamark, I'm regularly meeting with clients. I utilize Teams meetings to do that, and we'll with permission, of course, record and transcribe those meetings. And it really helps me because it does a good job through that LLM and that NLP collecting sort of the main high points, the action items, and the big discussion points that occurred in that meeting. And me, I like to work smarter, not harder. Some call that lazy. I'll admit that sometimes it is. But I use this prompt to go through my meetings in a week's time, usually, and kind of spit out for me the who, what, when, where, and why of each one of those meetings. And I'll just go through this with you, right? So I set it with context. You are a client success manager at Datamark. I tell it what I want, right? The instructions, create a deep summary of all meetings I joined last week. And I give it some constraints, include both transcribed and non-transcribed ones. For each meeting, include, again, I'm giving it instructions, include title, date, time, duration on only attendees who actually joined. Was that we put a bunch of people on as optional attendees, and it would always say that everybody joined. And I wanted it to only give me who actually joined for that conversation. Most importantly, include any available summary, agenda notes, or shared files or links from chats and emails. For non-transcribed emails, include available details such as agendas, shared files, or context from emails or chats. And then I give it some of that E in crispy. I just forgot what the E stands for, sorry. But I tell it use simple, concise language for CRM updates. And it does a really good job of bringing back a quick summary of those meetings that I can just air gap out of Copilot right into our client relationship management system or our CRM. So that's an example of one that works for me and following generally the crispy framework. So what's the evolution of all of this, to my mind, at least in the sort of short term, is a move to agentic AI. The thought that you may have an agent that is essentially a digital you out there is a little bit abstract for me. It's a little bit bizarre, but I was listening recently to a podcast episode of a New York Times podcast called The Daily, where they were talking about how in the future, dating will be very different because of agentic AI, where you may send your agent to have a date with a prospect's agent, and they'll essentially vet that you are fit to go for a date for this with this other person, that they may be, aligned with your purposes and means. Now that blows my mind. I don't ever intend to have an agent go on a date for me, but it tells the story of the intention behind what agentic AI really is. Systems that can plan tasks, take actions, check results, and iterate with guardrails. I like the very bottom line here. Think about a very fast junior analyst or assistant that definitely requires supervision still, right? So your agent shouldn't be just released to be you and do things in your name, but they can certainly go out and do some of the grunt work that needs to be done to analyze for a particular problem solve, and then bring that back to you so that you can do something about it. That's as far as I can wrap my head around what an AI agent would do for me, but I know in the future there's going to be things that I would never think of. But that's sort of the agentic AI that is all the rage as here in 2026. We'll see how that evolves and what comes of it. But let's drop back from sort of the what to some real practical examples. And I appreciate again, John, for joining me. He's got a couple of really great stories he can share with us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how PSAPs, and in particular there in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, are using AI today?
Sure. And yeah, I appreciate the invite. I think the easy part, I just get to tell stories. So there are two specific examples, and I guess I'll take my lead from you, Jeff. We're not going to use proper names, vendor names, right? You want that pretty?
Yeah,
okay.
We'll keep it general. Yeah,
I will. I'll do my best. If one slips by, they're not paying me, just so everybody knows.
Right.
But we have implemented a system similar to what Jeff was talking about, where the QA/QI piece is being developed so that um, the statewide mandate, and it's the national standard through NENA, is 2% of all 911 calls to be checked for quality assurance, evaluations, and use that as your trend to improve. So imagine just 2% of all 911 calls. But for our neighbors in Philadelphia who answer 3 million 911 calls a year, that 2% grows,
That's
right?
meaningful.
And we have, let me just make sure, I think in 2025, we answered about 225,000 plus about over half a million 10-digit calls.
Wow.
So about 780,000 calls in 25. So 2% is a lot.
Yeah.
That requires dedicated staff who are not being pulled into the 911 center to cover shifts, who, all 911 centers, if you're from a 911 center on this webinar, you're short staffed most likely. In my 30 years, I remember 3 months when we were fully staffed.
Yeah.
So it's typical that you are short staffed. So that has ripple effects into areas like QA/QI. And so you want to make sure, though, that your service, your quality does not drop. So that is an important aspect. And employing AI in that process will help us evaluate 100% of our calls for a certain area. All right. So we're talking about objective things like, did they get the address? Did they get the phone number? Did they collect certain things? Those objective things, yes or no? 100% of the calls can be reviewed for that. And really, for our newer people or rookies, those might be areas where they need some help initially, some coaching. So you don't allow that quality to drop. You're improving it. This allows our QA/QI staff to focus more on those subjective things. Were the proper protocols provided? Our customer service parameters, as far as tone and all of those things. You can flag things in a system like this for raised voice or things like that. So it can still be on the lookout for that. One of the things I can't wait to get started. We're in the process of getting all of this implemented. So we're still kind of new at this, but the one thing I'm excited to really employ is the auto-generated calls for training.
Yeah.
So you can feed into it, much like what you were doing for your statement. One slide back. Mm-hmm. You can feed it a specific incident, a certain caller at a certain heightened level. You can select an accent or another language, these items, and just build out incidents. So that would take time and extra people to roll through. And you don't want to replace humans, and I think we're going to get to that. But this enhances what we can do. So that's the first one. And if I missed anything, Jeff, just let me know. The second one is an auto attendant. So as I mentioned, we answered almost 550,000 10-digit calls in 2025. Wow. It is, and it runs anywhere from, I need a police report, where was my car towed? My neighbor's dog is barking for the past 3 hours. The people that need a service, but it's not emergent. What that is doing, though, is it's taking telecommunicators away from being available to answer 911 calls.
Right. Especially at that volume.
Yeah, right. So we entered into a pilot partnership with a company. Sorry,
No
trying
problem.
not to say.
You're doing a good
Um,
job.
they're a great partnership because they didn't say, "Here's a box, here's how it works. Now go use it."
Mhm.
They came to us with a mission of of improving that capability of making our telecommunicators available for 911 calls, and worked with us for over a year now on developing a platform that works in a 911 center, and we're consolidated. So Bucks County is about 650,000 people. We have 50 some municipalities, each having their own police departments, fire, EMS. So we don't work with just one entity, and it's a very complex network of, if they want this, but they're in this township, this is the answer. Um, so they worked with us over the past year, and we're getting to a point where we're entering. They have a portal where we have one individual now, instead of all the call takers answering 10-digit calls. We have one individual who's watching this portal, and so calls that are fully processed by this auto attendant pop up for dispatch in our cab. In the last 90 days, these stats are a couple weeks old, but they're, for trend purposes, they're still pretty accurate. The auto attendant answered about 15,000 calls in the past 90 days. The average handle time for those calls was about 45 seconds. And it understood 94% of what was being requested.
Wow.
That means, that doesn't mean like the other 6% were like kicked off and good luck, like you don't get help. It's there's a fail safe where it'll transfer back to one of our people in the center.
So that essentially means that 94% of those 500,000 across a year don't come to take up the time of a person in the call center.
If we had them all. So some of those 10 digits are, fire and EMS calling up to request a printout or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Those interagency ones we haven't directed toward this, but
Okay.
yes, conceptually, you're right. I mean, the idea is to drastically reduce the number of 10-digit calls
Mm-hmm.
that they still need help, non-emergent help, but something that the auto attendant can vet, send a request, and have dispatched without tying up a call taker.
Wow.
And so our average answer time before we put this in was about 6.4 seconds. After this process of vetting these calls, it was about 5.8. So
Wow.
5.8 to 6.4 doesn't sound like a lot, but over the course of hundreds of thousands of calls,
impactful.
that's a pretty significant drop. So we're excited. I mean, we're still piloting this. We found a great partner who is working with us on this, and I would say to other centers who are looking to try something out in AI. Don't do it all at once. Find a specific pain point and a partner who is willing to pilot with you on putting together a solution for that issue.
How did you train the models? Did you send it like recorded calls, or how did you train those?
That's a good question. And a couple of slides earlier, I thought about that. The realm in which we live or we work, you can't really share that in the general public, right? So the larger you open up your bucket in AI, the faster it'll learn. Right. But you can't release a lot of the information we have.
You've got some regulatory requirements that prevent you from doing that, right?
Right. So it's it takes some time to make it figure out. So an example is one of our largest municipalities is Ben Salem Township, Bensalem,
Mhm.
Ben Salem. And for the longest time at the beginning of this, we were trying to figure out who this Ben Salem was trying to call. And it thought it was hearing first name Ben,
Right.
last name Salem all the
Right.
time. So it learned, though, what that was
Yeah,
eventually.
based on context that it was a place, not a person. Huh?
Exactly.
Wow.
But it took maybe a little bit longer than it would if this was like a general open to the public,
Mhm.
uh, because yeah, we had to keep that closed in. But those are some of the lessons learned um, as we went through this.
Yeah, somebody in the chat here said, "How do you handle if someone calls non-emergency, but they still need an emergency? Do you just do non-emergency calls?" And I've heard different folks talk about how it's sort of assessing for sentiment and maybe it's listening for like urgency in the voice or something like that. How does that happen in that non-emergency queue?
Yeah, it is. It's listening for content, and we've honed in a lot of the different things that people will say. Uh, Again, contextually for us, there are certain things that are triggers. This is an emergency, and it goes.
Mhm.
Then it's an automatic transfer to a telecommunicator on 10 digit. Um, there's ways out like any other. You call your credit card company and you're yelling representative into the phone.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
you
I've
can do
never
that.
done that,
You're
John. Never.
like I don't enjoy talking to the AI in
No.
credit card, and I think this has technology solving a problem
Mhm.
that we have had for decades in public safety as far as staffing and workload.
Mhm.
Um, so uh, yeah, there are ways out of it. And again, with our agencies that we work with, we have direct numbers. They still come right here. We don't put everything to it.
Well, awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate you giving those real world examples of how, these large language models start and then you train it with your own sort of data and calls, and all of a sudden it's really able to relieve a problem, which is basically largely staffing, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the big nut. I think there are other things that um, this helps with as far as um, you know dispatchable calls. Uh, the one great uh, benefit to this is educating the public. So, hey, I'll put this call in for you. Have somebody respond. Here's the number to Ben Salem Police Department if you need to follow up. So it's feeding them information that may divert future calls to the right place instead of coming to us.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, let's carry those examples through this next part of our conversation about the elephants in the room. The first elephant in the room is ethical considerations. Everybody's concerned, appropriately concerned, and some people may be inappropriately concerned, maybe so concerned that they become Luddites. I don't know. I may or may not be in that camp. Um, about things like hallucination and bias, and over automation and data privacy. I mean, you spoke to it already in your example, how some regulatory requirements around data privacy keep you
Yeah.
from just sort of pouring everything you got into it. Um, I am fascinated by the thought of an AI having a bias, and I think there's been a lot of documented cases of that over the last 2 or 3 years as this has come along. And hallucinations, like if you don't tell it to only rely on the data that you've provided it, sometimes it can come up with some wild stuff.
Yeah.
And there's lots of stories out there about that. Um, Also transparency, right? And I feel like especially in your role, transparency would be extra important as you kind of ease into this, where people are very concerned about it. You've probably got people very, very, very concerned about it that are really going to sort of pick at maybe some of things around what are you doing with my data? Where's it going? Why is
Mhm.
it being used? Transparency kind of solves most of that, right? Because if people understand what's going on with it, they understand that your mission is to solve the problem of staffing a 911 center, or to solve the problem of making call takers more effective at their job with that QA/QI use case, then I would imagine most folks at that point are right on board with you in that. So you should always be able to explain where we use the AI, what it did for us, what humans did with what it did for us, right? The outputs of it. Is a human reviewing the output? Is AI supporting, not replacing judgment? Would it be more comfortable? Would it be comfortable explaining this to the public? Would we be comfortable explaining this to the public? And in that vein, the idea of human in the loop and human on the loop becomes pretty critical, right? You can think of human in the loop as controlled by design. The data feeds the AI makes outputs, then a human reviews that data output and then takes action. Humans are not watching, but they are participating in this loop, which I would definitely think your QA/QI qualifies there, right? Because the AI is not fixing or not recommending a training or whatever, or maybe recommending it, but it's not forcing the call taker to go do a certain type of training without the QA supervisor still stepping in and saying, you know what, good observations, AI. Here, we're going to make this call taker take this particular level of training.
Yeah, it's waving the flag.
Yeah.
Yep.
Versus human on the loop, trust with oversight. This is more of the agentic idea, right? Where the AI actually makes decisions based on the guardrails that you give it, but you don't necessarily intervene on those decisions until they're already taken action on, right? Human are supervisors, not approvers. So those are sort of two classifications of different loops, if you will, of these flows that happen. And it's an important concept. I think this table very well sort of lays it out. And I think most public safety uses of AI, at least in the immediate term, are going to fall in that human on the loop because we just don't quite trust it. I know I certainly wouldn't without any human review in there either. So
yeah, and I think
oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just culturally speaking, you're dealing with people who are used to controlling a situation. So,
Yes.
this is a cultural shift. But as we move toward trying to develop high performance teams in our center, you introduce this, like you said, in the loop and transition it. The things that are practical to transition to on the loop.
Yep. Yep. That's a great way to think of it. Good point there. You're right that PSAPs and public safety have a certain culture and a certain perspective, especially around trust, right? I know if you deal with law enforcement entities, if you don't have a badge and a gun, your opinion is not considered. And so each of us have kind of those parameters that we sort of have built our own ethos around that have to go into the consideration of these things as well. So the big elephant in the room too is AI going to replace you? I think your example of the automated attendant is right in this ballpark, right? The idea that we have a staffing shortage, and so we're going to use AI to maybe ease that staffing shortage, may or may not even solve the staffing shortage. It's not really going to be replacing people. What's your thoughts or take on that?
Yeah, I've been we have unions in our center, and I've been very open. We've had an open conversation from the start of this project that we are not trying to take away positions. We're not trying to take away staff. For decades, and we won't stop. You recruit and you hire and you train and you bring more people in and you retain them as best you can. But it's time to also start looking at that workload balance. What can I do from a workload balance that would bring that workload to a sufficient level for the people I currently have? And when you have the capability using technology to do that, then I think you're really accountable to take that into consideration.
Right.
In addition to continuing, you never just stop hiring. But
Yeah, almost in a way that says not only what is the cost and opportunity cost of doing it, but also what is the cost and opportunity cost of not doing this,
mhm,
right? Of
yeah,
not clearing those non-emergency calls. The cost is that you have more of a staffing problem. You have less attention to give to actual emergent calls, and the sort of concentration of useful calls for those folks to process seems to me would bring big benefits.
yeah,
And I think it's important to note what we have here in the last bullet point as well, what it can't replace, right? It's artificial intelligence, it's not intelligence, right? It's not human intelligence, I'll say it that way.
right.
It can't replace the local knowledge, right? It can't replace a, a dispatcher or a GIS person for that matter that knows of that one particular block range where there's always a jacked up address point. And if AI is given the task of assigning addresses completely autonomously, it's not going to know what to do with those anomaly situations. Even with the best of training, it's going to come up with some weird stuff.
Mhm,
So there's got to be an acknowledgement that it can't replace a local knowledge. It certainly can't replace accountability or liability, right? So if your center makes a call and a dispatch based on AI input, AI outputs, and it's the wrong call, it's still the wrong call. And the AI is not going to be sued for that, right? Your agency is. So, and that applies in GIS as well. There's still going to be accountability into what that data goes into and does. And it's not going to matter whether it's produced by AI or a human. But it is going to matter that there was thoughtful, workflows that led to that particular data output that is consumed and used in a PSAP. Um, let's see. Yep. So we're coming up on the end here. One step forward. You said this earlier, and I thought that was really good. Not all at once, right?
yeah,
We're not
right.
gonna we're not gonna take every AI solution that comes available, no matter how amazing the promises are. We're gonna be thoughtful about it. We're gonna make sure we do our homework, use it intentionally, starting with low risk tasks, keep humans in the loop. And this bullet point says let AI handle the first 60%. I mean, I've said it lots of times in my private conversations, it does a pretty good job, a pretty good 80-20% solution where if I need to write a letter to somebody on a personal matter, that has some sort of legal demand or as an appeal to a process, I had to go through a process with my son and some governmental benefits that he receives and the letter that they sent me rejecting those said, hey, you can file an appeal. Well, didn't tell me really much about that other than send a letter here. So I fed that to ChatGPT in my personal life, right? And it gave me back a beautiful lawyerly letter, right? That said, I disagree with your finding. I hereby appeal it, and based on the state code of XYZ, I want to follow this process. And it was pretty good. It was way better than I could have come up with on my own. And all I had to do was make sure that the details were right. So uh, I like to think of it as AI removing friction, not responsibility. Any last thoughts on that there? And then we'll just show a little fun example here as we wrap up.
The one thing I would recommend um, in this one step forward concept is understand your county or local, state, and federal guidelines with AI. Include if you're in a municipal type of government, include your IT group almost immediately. Having those conversations early will set you up to have the right expectation moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good advice. Critical that you understand the environment that you're operating in before
Yeah.
you sort of charge off. Yep. Good. Well,
Is
thank
this
you
where
for
the
that.
action figure comes in?
Yes, this is the
Oh.
fun example, right? So I fed this picture of my headshot that was taken a lot longer ago than I want to admit. and I gave ChatGPT the prompt, make a picture of a 3D action figure toy named 911 GIS Data Master and make it look like it's being displayed in a transparent plastic package blister packaging model. Now I iterated on this endlessly and with a lot of fun variations, but I just wanted to show you some of the intermediate products that came out. The first one was this. Wow, what an action figure. That one kind
Somebody
of
said
scared me.
propeller in the
Yeah,
chat too.
that's
So
right, right. Propeller heads unite. That's right. This one kind of scared me though, it was like, oh, I don't know about that. So I kept iterating, got a little more cartoony, right, about it. I said, let's go on brand here. We'll get the right color of t-shirt and add a couple of accessories here that GIS and map nerds would like to have with them. And I added my webinar famous edition to it and landed eventually on this. Then a GIS day happens every November, and I use this on LinkedIn with the GIS day edition of it. So it's a lot of fun. Take that prompt and have some fun with that. If you're interested in some more of the details of the prompt that I actually wound up with to get this final product, just feel free to reach out to me or put your contact information in the chat, and I'll be happy to reach back to you and send you that prompt. It's a lot of fun to play with, but it was a really good example of how I could have never created this graphic on my own using Photoshop or anything like that. Um, and it was, just a little bit of language and instructions and thoughts in my head into words and typing brought about this pretty interesting, kind of a fun little output here. So it was a good experiment to do. So we'll wrap it up for today. Thank you so much to everybody for giving us your time. Thank you, John, for joining us. I really appreciate the insights that you shared and the experience that you shared.
thank you.
I'll just reemphasize the National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week prize nominations. Please take a look at the link that Steph put in the chat. Also, if you have your mobile handy, just scan the QR code here, and that'll take you to the nomination form. And then I'll just do a little bit of advertising here. April 14th, we'll do a webinar, a NINA webinar. So you'll get that through your NINA email from Chris Nussman on breaking down next gen core services. So appreciate everybody's time and attention today. Have a good day, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thank you.